The first thing anyone noticed about Technical Sergeant Kiera Voss wasn't her face or her frame, or even the faded flight suit she wore like a second skin. It was the silence that followed her into rooms. Not the awkward kind. The kind that meant someone had earned the right to let their work speak first. She'd been fixing A-10 Thunderbolts for 6 years at Bagram before anyone knew she could fly one. Before anyone knew, she'd logged more stick time in the Warthog than half the rated pilots on base. Before the morning, she walked into the operations tent with grease still under her nails, and told the mission commander she could bring back a plane everyone else had written off as lost. The A-10 sat 3 clicks outside the wire, nose down in a dried riverbed, one engine silent, the other coughing black smoke into the Afghan dawn. The pilot had ejected. Taliban were moving in. Command wanted it destroyed before they stripped the avionics and turned American tech into propaganda. Voss said she could fly it out. They laughed, not cruelly, just the way people laugh when someone suggests something impossible. She didn't argue. She just asked for a Black Hawk ride to the crash site and a security team. The operations officer, a major with more time in briefing rooms than cockpits, looked at her like she'd suggested walking on water. But the squadron commander, a lieutenant colonel named Rourke who'd watched her strip and rebuild engines in sandstorms, nodded once. That was all it took. The Black Hawk insertion was textbook until it wasn't. 2 clicks out, the radar warning receiver lit up, surface-to-air threat. The pilot banked hard, dropping altitude so fast Voss's stomach pressed into her spine. Through the open door, she saw the A-10 below, canted at 20 degrees, one wing dragging in the dirt, smoke still rising, and movement, small dark figures approaching from the east. The crew chief handed her a headset. Rourke's voice crackled through. "Voss, we've got 15 minutes before that area is overrun. If you can't start her, you rig the charges and get out. Understood?" She keyed the mic. "Understood, sir, but I won't need charges." The crew chief met her eyes. He didn't look convinced. Neither did the 4-man security team strapped in beside her, their rifles held tight, faces grim behind ballistic eyewear. The Black Hawk flared hard, wheels touching down 30 meters from the stricken Warthog. Voss was out before the skids settled, sprinting across hardpan, kit bouncing against her ribs. Up close, the A-10 looked worse. Hydraulic fluid pooled under the fuselage. The canopy was cracked. The left main gear strut was bent. But the right engine was still turning barely, and the gauges inside the cockpit showed electrical power. Voss hauled herself up the side, boots finding purchase on the weathered titanium bathtub that wrapped the cockpit. She dropped into the seat. It still smelled like JP-8 and sweat. The ejection seat pins were missing. The stick was loose. She didn't care. Her hands moved across the panel, flipping switches, checking circuit breakers, calling out readings to herself like a liturgy. Battery voltage good. Hydraulics failing but functional. Right engine spooling. Left engine dead. She could work with that. Behind her, gunfire cracked in short bursts. The security team had made contact. She didn't look back. Her world narrowed to the instruments, the throttle, the startup sequence she'd memorized years ago. The right engine roared to life, a deep guttural bellow that shook the airframe. She tested the stick. Sluggish but responsive. The rudder pedals fought her. She keyed the radio, switching to the ground frequency. "Black Hawk, this is Voss. I have engine start, preparing to taxi." The pilot's voice came back tense. "Voss, you've got hostiles closing from the east. 200 meters and moving fast. We're taking fire. You need to move now." She didn't answer. She released the brakes. The A-10 groaned, metal scraping dirt, and began to roll forward. The left wing dragged. The nose wobbled. She corrected with rudder, compensating for the dead engine, feeling the aircraft respond like a wounded animal learning to walk again. The riverbed stretched ahead, barely wide enough, littered with rocks. She pushed the throttle forward. The right engine screamed, 50 knots, 60. The stick felt heavy, the controls fighting her. She pulled back. The nose lifted, then dropped. Not enough speed, not enough lift. Rounds pinged off the fuselage. She ignored them, 70 knots, 80. The Warthog shuddered. She pulled harder. The nose came up. The main gear left the ground. The left wing dipped, scraping dirt one last time before she wrestled it level. 90 knots. She was airborne, barely. The altimeter showed 50 feet, then 60. The engine temperature gauge climbed into the red. She didn't ease off. She couldn't. The radio erupted. "Voss, you're streaming smoke. Left wing is—" "I know," she cut in. Her voice was calm. "I'm flying." Below, the security team and the Blackhawk lifted off, rotors beating the air, bullets stitching the ground where they'd stood. Voss climbed to 200 feet, keeping the damaged A-10 low, hugging the terrain. The left wing shuddered. She trimmed it out. The engine temperature hit critical. She reduced throttle slightly, letting the aircraft settle into a wounded but stable flight profile. Ahead, the mountains rose dark against the dawn. Behind, smoke trails marked where the Taliban had fired. None had found her. She keyed the squadron frequency. "Bagram Tower, this is Technical Sergeant Voss, inbound with tail number 794. Single engine, heavy battle damage, request priority landing." There was a pause, then the tower came back. "Copy that, 794, cleared direct, emergency equipment standing by." Another voice broke in. "Rourke. Voss, that was the craziest thing I've ever seen." She allowed herself a small smile. "It's what I do, sir." The landing was controlled chaos. Fire trucks lined the taxiway. Pilots and crew chiefs crowded the ramp, watching as the smoking Warthog settled onto the runway with one engine and a prayer. The left main gear collapsed on rollout, the wing scraping sparks, but Voss held it straight until the aircraft ground to a halt. She shut down the engine, popped the canopy. Smoke poured out. She climbed down, legs shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up. Rourke was there first, hands on his hips, shaking his head. "You just saved the Air Force $500,000 and a mountain of paperwork," she shrugged. "I just wanted to bring her home, sir." He studied her for a long moment. "You're a pilot, Voss. You just don't have the papers yet." She met his eyes. "Then let's fix that, sir." 3 weeks later, Voss was in flight school, not the standard pipeline. Rourke had pushed a waiver through, citing operational necessity and extraordinary aptitude. The instructors at Laughlin Air Force Base didn't know what to make of her. She was older than the other students. Quieter, she didn't have a college degree, but she had something they didn't. She'd already saved an A-10 under fire. She'd already proven she could fly when it mattered. The academics came easily. She'd been reading technical manuals for years. The simulator hours felt like coming home. The actual flight training was where she shined. Her stick work was smooth, her judgment sound. She didn't showboat, she didn't need to. By the time she soloed, the instructors were already talking about her. By the time she graduated, she had the highest scores in her class. They gave her the call sign Grease. At first, she thought it was an insult, a reference to her enlisted maintenance background. Then her instructor told her the truth. "You make it look easy, Voss, like the plane's greased, like there's no friction between you and the machine." Pinned on her wing 6 months later, Second Lieutenant Kiera Voss, A-10 pilot, she requested Bagram. They sent her to Kandahar, different base, same war, same mission, close air support, the Warthog's bread and butter. She flew her first combat sortie 3 days after arriving, troops in contact, Taliban ambush. She put 30mm rounds into a tree line and watched the enemy scatter. The JTAC on the ground called her the best show he'd seen all week. She didn't respond. She just turned for home, checked her fuel, and started mentally rehearsing the debrief. Flying for real was different than simulators. The stakes were human. The radio calls were desperate. The enemy shot back. But the fundamentals were the same. Stay calm, trust your training, bring everyone home. She did that for 96 missions. She became known for precision, for patience, for talking nervous JTACs through their first calls for fire and staying on station longer than her fuel should allow. The SEALs didn't ask for her by name at first. They asked for that pilot who doesn't miss. That was enough. The mission brief was sparse. Hostage rescue, high-value target, deep in Helmand Province. The ground element was SEAL Team 6. The air package included 2 Apache gunships, a Predator drone, and Voss in her A-10. They wanted the Warthog for firepower. The 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon could shred a building or disable a vehicle with surgical precision. Voss sat in the briefing room, the only fixed-wing pilot, the only woman, the only lieutenant in a room full of senior officers and operators whose names she wasn't cleared to know. The SEAL team leader, a commander with a face carved from stone and eyes that had seen things she could only imagine, gave the mission overview. The target was a compound, hostage inside, heavy guard force. No room for error. He looked at her. Lieutenant Voss, you'll be our overhead cover. If we call you in, it means everything's gone sideways. We need fast, accurate, and close. Voss nodded. How close, sir? The commander didn't blink. Danger close, 10 meters from friendlies. The Apache pilots exchanged glances. Danger close was 30 meters, 10 meters was suicide. The commander continued. We've seen your gun tapes, you don't miss, that's why you're here. She felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders, not pressure, responsibility. There was a difference. Understood, sir. If you call, I'll deliver. The briefing ended. The Apache lifted off first. Then the drone. Voss launched 30 minutes later, the A-10 loaded with full ammunition, a belly full of fuel and flares for days. The flight to Helmand took an hour. She checked in with the Tactical Operations Center. The SEALs were 30 minutes from target. She orbited at 15,000 feet, high enough to be invisible, close enough to respond in seconds. The night was clear. Stars filled the sky. Below, the desert was black. She toggled her targeting pod, scanning the terrain, memorizing landmarks. The compound appeared on infrared, small, walled, heat signatures inside. The mission clock ticked down. Voss stayed quiet on the radio. The SEALs inserted by helicopter, fast-roping into the darkness 3 clicks from the compound. They moved on foot. Voss tracked their progress on her display, watching the infrared signatures ghost through the landscape. 15 minutes out, 10 minutes, 5, then the call came. Reaper, this is Saber 1, we have eyes on target, moving to breach. Reaper was the mission call sign. Voss keyed her mic. Saber 1, Reaper copies, standing by. She tightened her orbit, descending to 10,000 feet. The compound filled her targeting pod screen. She could see guards moving, 2 on the roof, 3 near the gate. The SEALs approached from the south, silent shadows. She watched them stack at the gate. The breach was explosive, literally. The gate blew inward, the SEALs flowed through. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes on infrared. Then the voice, calm, urgent. Reaper, Saber 1, troops in contact, heavy resistance. Hostage secure, but we're pinned. Voss was already rolling in. She nosed the A-10 over, descending fast, throttling back to keep speed manageable. The compound rushed up. She acquired the target, the north wall, guards firing from a fortified position. She armed the gun. Saber 1, Reaper, confirm your position. I need a mark. North wall, hostiles firing from second-story windows. We're southwest corner behind the vehicle, 25 meters. 25 meters, not 10, but close enough to matter. She double-checked the targeting pod, saw the vehicle, saw the muzzle flashes. She adjusted her aim. Saber 1, Reaper, gun run inbound, keep your heads down. We trust you, Reaper, send it. She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared, 50 rounds in 2 seconds. The second-story wall disintegrated. Infrared bloomed white as bodies fell. The gunfire stopped. Voss pulled off, banking hard, checking for more threats. Saber 1, Reaper, target destroyed, how copy? Reaper, you just saved our asses. Moving now. The SEALs extracted. Hostage alive. 0 friendly casualties. Voss stayed overhead until they were wheels up, then turned for home. She didn't say much in the debrief. The SEAL commander did. He told the room that Voss had put 30mm rounds through windows 20 meters from his men without hesitation, without error, without a scratch on the good guys. He said she flew like the aircraft was part of her. He said his team wanted her on every mission going forward. Voss sat quietly, hands folded, listening. When he finished, she said, "Just doing my job, sir." He shook his head. "No, Lieutenant, that wasn't just a job, that was art." The word stuck with her, art. She'd never thought of flying that way, but maybe he was right. Maybe the best pilots didn't just operate machines. They became them. They felt the air, the speed, the angle, the moment when metal and human will merged into something greater. The SEALs requested her by name after that. 12 more missions, each one harder than the last. She put rounds through doorways, into vehicles, along ridgelines, always close, always precise. She learned their rhythms, their voices, the way they called targets. They learned to trust her completely. On her 19th mission with them, something changed. They weren't pinned, they weren't in contact. They were clearing a compound when the call came. Reaper, Saber 1, we've got wounded. Friendly fire from an Apache. Need immediate medevac and someone to run interference. Voss didn't hesitate. She broke orbit, descended, and parked her A-10 between the compound and the Apache, cutting off its line of fire. She didn't ask permission, she just did it. The Apache pilot came up on the frequency, confused, angry. Voss cut him off. Break off now, friendlies on the ground. The Apache peeled away. The medevac came in. The wounded SEAL survived. The commander found her after the mission. You put yourself between us and that gunship. She nodded. Yes, sir. Why? Because you needed me too. He studied her for a long time. Then he extended his hand. From now on, Lieutenant, you're one of us. She shook his hand. It meant more than any medal. The missions continued. Voss flew through dust storms, through darkness, through enemy fire that lit up the sky like fireworks. She flew until her flight suit smelled like jet fuel permanently, until her hands moved across the controls without conscious thought, until the A-10 felt less like a machine and more like an extension of her own body. She flew until the other pilots stopped making jokes about the enlisted maintainer who became a pilot, until they started asking her for advice, until her gun camera footage became training material, until younger pilots called her ma'am, with the kind of respect that had nothing to do with rank. She flew until the war shifted, and the missions became fewer, and the deployments ended, and she came home to a base in Arizona where the sun was hot, and the sky was empty, and nobody was shooting. She became an instructor. It wasn't a choice. It was an inevitability. The Air Force didn't let pilots like Voss just fade away. They put her in the left seat of a two-seat trainer and told her to teach the next generation. She did. She taught them to fly smoothly, to think ahead, to stay calm when the radios screamed and the ground erupted and everything went wrong. She taught them that the best pilots weren't the ones who pulled the hardest Gs or flew the fastest. They were the ones who brought everyone home. She taught them that precision mattered more than bravado, that the machine would do what you asked if you respected it, that flying was a conversation between human and aircraft, and the best pilots listened more than they talked. Her students loved her. Her students feared her, not because she was cruel, because she expected excellence, because she'd been there, because when she said, "You can do better," they knew she'd already done it herself. Years passed. Voss made captain, then major. She turned down desk jobs. She wanted to fly. They let her. She logged more hours in the A-10 than almost anyone in the service. She became the pilot other pilots told stories about, the one who brought a crippled warthog home from a riverbed in Afghanistan, the one who flew danger close for the SEALs and never missed, the one who put herself between friendlies and an Apache without hesitation, the one who made it look easy. Grease. The call sign followed her everywhere. She wore it with quiet pride. It represented everything she believed: smooth, competent, unshakable, the kind of pilot you wanted overhead when everything went to hell, the kind of pilot who didn't need recognition because the work spoke for itself. She thought about retiring, about what came after the cockpit. But every time she climbed into the A-10, every time she felt the engine spool up and the stick respond and the world fall away beneath her, she knew she wasn't done. Then the call came, not a mission, a ceremony. The Air Force wanted to honor her, a silver star delayed by years of paperwork and classification, for the missions with the SEALs, for flying danger close when no one else would, for the lives saved. She almost declined. She didn't fly for medals, but her commander insisted. Voss, people need to see this. They need to know what excellence looks like. So she stood on a parade ground in Arizona, dress blues crisp, ribbons gleaming, while a general she'd never met read her citation. The crowd was small. Fellow pilots, maintainers, a handful of reporters, and in the back standing quietly a group of men in civilian clothes. She recognized them immediately. The SEALs. The commander was there, older now, grayer, but the same eyes. After the ceremony, he approached. Major Voss, or should I say Grease? She smiled. Just Voss is fine, sir. He shook his head. You saved my men more times than I can count. Figured the least we could do was show up. They talked for an hour about the war, about the missions, about the moments that still woke them up at night. He told her something she'd never known. On the mission where she'd parked her A-10 between them and the Apache, the wounded SEAL had been his brother, not by blood but by bond. You didn't just save a teammate, Voss, you saved family. She felt her throat tight. She didn't trust herself to speak. He continued. There are pilots and then there are pilots like you. The kind who see the mission not as a task but as a promise. You promised to keep us safe. You kept that promise every single time. That's rare. She found her voice. I'd do it again, sir, every time, he nodded. I know you would, that's why we're here. They shook hands again. This time it felt like goodbye. The SEALs left. Voss stood alone on the parade ground, the silver star heavy against her chest, the sky above her wide and blue and infinite. She flew for 5 more years. Then her body made the decision for her. The ejections, the G-forces, the years of stress had taken their toll. Her back ached. Her knees creaked. The flight surgeon told her what she already knew. It was time. She retired as a lieutenant colonel, 22 years of service, thousands of flight hours, more combat missions than she could count. They threw her a party. Pilots came from across the country, maintainers she'd worked with at Bagram, instructors she'd trained with, students she'd taught. The SEAL commander sent a video message. Grease, he said, looking into the camera, you're the best pilot I've ever worked with, the best pilot I've ever seen. Thank you for keeping us safe. Thank you for showing us what excellence looks like. We'll never forget you. The room erupted in applause. Voss stood at the front, composed as always, but her eyes were wet. Her final flight was in an A-10. They let her take one last sortie, a simple training run, nothing classified, nothing dangerous. She climbed into the cockpit one last time. The seat fit like it always had. The controls responded like old friends. She taxied to the runway, ran through the checklist, and pushed the throttles forward. The Warthog roared. The world blurred. She lifted off. At 5,000 feet, she leveled out and looked around. The desert stretched below, golden in the afternoon sun. The sky was endless. She keyed the radio. Tower, this is Grease. Thanks for letting me dance one more time. The tower came back. Grease, it's been an honor. Clear skis, ma'am. She flew for an hour. She didn't do anything fancy. She just flew. She climbed. She dove. She rolled gently, feeling the aircraft respond. She felt the sun on the canopy, the vibration of the engines, the slight resistance in the stick. She felt alive. When she landed, the squadron was waiting. Fire trucks sprayed water arches over the taxiway. She shut down the engines, popped the canopy, climbed down for the last time. The squadron commander met her at the bottom of the ladder. How was it, ma'am? Voss looked back at the A-10, its nose art-worn, its skin patched from 100 missions, its engine silent now. Perfect, she said. It was perfect. They walked her off the flight lane together. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The aircraft, the missions, the moments when she'd proven herself again and again, they were all part of her now. Grease. The call sign was more than a name. It was a legacy. She left the Air Force quietly. No fanfare, no speeches. She bought a house near the mountains. She took up hiking. She read books. She slept without dreaming of gunfire. But every time she heard a jet overhead, she stopped and looked up. And every time, for just a moment, she was back in the cockpit, hands on the stick, the world falling away, the mission clear, the promise kept. Years later, a young pilot reached out to her. A woman, fresh from flight school, assigned to A-10s, nervous about her first deployment. She'd heard the stories about Greece. She wanted advice. Voss invited her to lunch. They sat at a small cafe, the young pilot asking 100 questions, Voss answering each one with patience. Finally, the pilot asked, "How did you do it, ma'am? How did you earn their respect?" Voss was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't try to earn respect. I tried to be excellent. I tried to keep my promises. The respect came because I did the work and I did it well and I never made it about me." The young pilot nodded, absorbing the words. "And the fear, did it ever go away?" Voss smiled. "No, it never goes away, but you learn to fly with it. You learn that fear keeps you sharp. It keeps you honest. The best pilots aren't fearless. They're just better at managing the fear than everyone else." The young pilot deployed 6 months later. She flew her first combat mission and put rounds exactly where the JTAC called them. She flew smooth. She flew precise. She flew like someone had taught her that excellence wasn't about being the loudest or the flashiest. It was about being the best when it mattered most. After the mission, her flight lead asked where she'd learned to fly like that. She said, "I had a good teacher." The flight lead asked who. She said, "Lieutenant Colonel Voss, call sign Grease." Flight lead went quiet. Then he nodded. You learned from the best, she had. And years from now, when she became an instructor herself, she'd pass the lessons on. She'd teach the next generation to fly smoothly, to think clearly, to keep their promises. She'd tell them about a pilot who started as a maintainer, who saved an A-10 in a riverbed, who flew danger close for the SEALs, who made it look easy even when it was impossible. She'd tell them that the best pilots weren't born. They were built. One mission, one decision, one moment of excellence at a time. Voss grew older. Her hair turned gray. Her hands, once steady on a control stick, now trembled slightly when she held a coffee cup. But her mind stayed sharp. She watched the news. She saw new wars, new pilots, new aircraft, but the A-10 kept flying. They tried to retire it a dozen times. Congress kept it alive. The pilots kept requesting it. The ground troops kept praising it. Because the Warthog did one thing better than any aircraft in the sky. It kept people alive. Voss understood that better than anyone. She'd lived it. She'd made it her mission. And even now, years removed from the cockpit, she felt a fierce pride when she saw an A-10 in the sky. That was her aircraft, her community, her legacy. She'd added her name to the long line of pilots who'd flown the ugly, slow, unstoppable Warthog, and proven that sometimes the best weapon wasn't the fastest or the stealthiest. Sometimes it was the one that refused to quit, the one that came home, the one that kept its promises. On a warm evening in Arizona, Voss sat on her porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. The sky was painted orange and purple, the colors bleeding together like an oil painting. She heard the sound before she saw it, a low rumble, the unmistakable growl of turbofan engines. She looked up. An A-10 flew overhead, low and slow, the pilot probably returning from a training sortie. The aircraft banked slightly, the wings catching the fading light, and for a moment it looked like it was made of gold. Voss raised her hand in a small salute. The pilot wouldn't see it. Didn't matter, it wasn't for him. It was for the aircraft, for the missions, for the promise she'd made all those years ago and kept every single time. The A-10 disappeared over the horizon. The sound faded. Voss lowered her hand. The sky was quiet again. She sat there until the stars came out, thinking about all the flights, all the moments, all the times she'd felt the stick in her hand and known, beyond any doubt, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Inside, her phone buzzed. A text from the young pilot she'd mentored. "Ma'am, just finished my 100th mission. They're talking about giving me a call sign. Thought you should know." Voss smiled. She typed back slowly, her thumbs clumsy on the small screen. "Congratulations. Whatever they call you, make it mean something. Make it about the work, not the glory. Fly safe." The response came quickly. "Copy that, ma'am, and thank you for everything." Voss set the phone down. The stars were bright now, scattered across the sky like diamonds. She thought about all the pilots who'd come before her, who'd taught her, who'd shown her what it meant to be excellent. She thought about all the pilots who'd come after, who she'd taught, who were carrying the lessons forward. The line was unbroken. The promise was kept. That was legacy. Not the medals, not the ceremonies, not the stories people told. Legacy was the quiet passing of knowledge, the steady hand on the shoulder, the voice that said, "You can do this," when doubt crept in. Legacy was teaching someone to be better than you, and then watching them succeed. Voss stood slowly, her knees protesting, and walked inside. The house was quiet. The walls were decorated with photos, her and her squadron, her and the SEALs, her in the cockpit of an A-10, helmet on, visor down, ready to fly. She paused at that photo. The woman in the picture looked young, fierce, unbreakable. Voss barely recognized her, but she remembered being her. She remembered the feeling of the stick, the roar of the engines, the clarity that came when everything else fell away and it was just her and the mission and the promise. She turned off the lights. She went to bed. And for the first time in a long time, she dreamed of flying, not a mission, not a combat sortie, just flying. The sky was blue. The air was smooth. The A-10 responded to her touch like it always had. She climbed higher, chasing the sun, and the world below grew small and distant and quiet. In the dream, she wasn't running from anything. She wasn't proving anything. She was just flying, and it was enough.